The year is 1307. Toulouse, a city steeped in history and shadowed by heresy, braced itself for the arrival of Inquisitor Bernard Gouy. Whispers of his unwavering resolve and merciless pursuit of dissenters preceded him like a chilling wind. Toulouse, a vital hub in Languedoc, was more than just stone and mortar. It was a tapestry of lives, hopes, and secrets, a city where the echoes of Catharism still resonated despite decades of persecution. The church's long shadow stretched over every market stall and cobblestone street. The Cathars, also known as Albigensians, once thrived in this region. Their belief in dualism, the eternal struggle between good and evil, challenged the very foundations of the Catholic Church. Though their strongholds were crushed in the Albigensian Crusade, their ideals persisted in the hearts of many. The Inquisition's methods were stark and public. The auto da fe, or act of faith, served as a grim spectacle, a warning to anyone who dared to stray from the Church's doctrine. Confessions, whether true or coerced, were extracted, and punishments meted out with chilling efficiency. Sister Agnes, a compassionate nun within the walls of a Toulouse convent, found herself increasingly troubled by the Inquisition's zeal. The suffering she witnessed chipped away at her faith, fostering a growing unease about the righteousness of their cause. Agnes sought solace in prayer, but the familiar words offered little comfort. The faces of the accused, their pleas for mercy, haunted her waking hours and invaded her dreams. Bernard Gouy, driven by an unshakable belief in his divine purpose, meticulously documented every denunciation, every confession, every act of defiance. He saw himself as a shepherd protecting his flock from the wolves of heresy. The French monarchy, under Philip IV, wielded considerable influence over the Church. Political ambitions and the desire for control often intertwined with the religious fervor of the Inquisition. In the village of Montelou, nestled in the Pyrenees, the priest Pierre Clergue skillfully manipulated the fears and prejudices of his parishioners. He used accusations of heresy as a weapon to settle old scores and consolidate his own power. Guillaume Belibest, the last known Cathar perfect, lived a life of constant flight, carrying the flame of his forbidden faith. He wandered the countryside, offering solace and guidance to the scattered remnants of his flock, always one step ahead of the Inquisitor's reach. Bernard Gouy's relentless pursuit of heresy led him ever closer to Belibest. He saw the Cathar perfect as the embodiment of all that he opposed, a threat that must be eradicated at any cost. As the shadow of the Inquisition deepened, Sister Agnes found herself at a crossroads. The path of obedience seemed increasingly at odds with the whispers of her conscience. The fate of Belibest, and the many others persecuted in the name of faith, weighed heavily on her soul. High in the Pyrenees, where the air is thin and the world stretches out below like a tapestry, Guillaume Belibest, the last known perfect of the Cathar faith, found sanctuary. Here, the remnants of his flock sought refuge, their beliefs a flickering flame against the encroaching darkness of the Inquisition. Belibest ministered to his followers, offering solace and reaffirming their faith. He spoke of the two principles, the good God of the New Testament and the evil God of the Old, creator of the material world which traps the divine spark within humanity. He explained the Cathar rejection of earthly sacraments and their belief in reincarnation, guiding them towards spiritual purity and the eventual release of their souls. The shadow of the Inquisition loomed large, even in these remote heights. Belibest knew that his sanctuary could not last forever. He dispatched scouts and moved the community frequently, always staying one step ahead of Bernard Gouy's relentless pursuit. To gather supplies and spread his message, Bilibest often traveled in disguise. He became a traveling merchant, a simple farmer, even a wandering minstrel, each persona carefully crafted to conceal his true identity. He uses these travels to spread his message of hope, and that true faith can be found without the church. Around crackling fires under the cloak of night, Bilibest shared parables and stories, subtly weaving Cathar beliefs into his narratives. He spoke of love, compassion, and the importance of inner faith, touching the hearts of those weary of the church's rigid doctrines. On one such journey he was betrayed. An informer, seeking favor with the Inquisition, revealed his presence to Bernard Goui's agents. Bilibest narrowly escaped, fleeing into the dense forests, the hounds of the Inquisition snapping at his heels. He found refuge in a hollow log, the sounds of the search party echoing around him. He pressed himself against the damp wood, his heart pounding in his chest, praying for deliverance. He escaped, but not unscathed. A twisted ankle and a deep gash on his leg slowed his progress. He limped through the wilderness, relying on his knowledge of the land and his unwavering will to survive. He found unexpected kindness in a young shepherd boy, who shared his meager meal and helped him find his way back to the hidden community. Such acts of compassion sustained him, reminding him of the goodness that still existed in the world. Back in the sanctuary, Bilibest continued his work, teaching the children the scriptures and passing on the traditions of their faith. He knew that the future of Catharism lay in their hands, in their ability to keep the flame alive. But even as he taught, he knew that their refuge was temporary. The eyes of the Inquisition were always watching, their reach ever extending. He felt the weight of his responsibility, the burden of being the last perfect, the shepherd of a dwindling flock. As darkness fell, Bilibest climbed to the highest peak, his flute in hand. He played a mournful tune, a lament for his lost brethren, a prayer for the future. The wind carried his song across the mountains, a whisper of defiance against the encroaching shadows of faith. A fresh accusation had reached Bernard Gouy. This time, it wasn't the familiar specter of Catharism, but something darker, something whispered in hushed tones: witchcraft. A villager from a hamlet near Cordes had accused a local woman of consorting with demons, of blighting crops and poisoning wells. Gouy, ever vigilant, saw another avenue to root out heresy in all its forms. News of the accusation reached Sister Agnes. Though her days were filled with prayer and service, the shadow of the Inquisition stretched even into the sanctuary of the convent. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, that the pursuit of heresy was becoming an end in itself, regardless of the suffering it caused. In the village of Cordes, Pierre Clergue held sway. He was the local priest, a man of ambition and influence. He knew the villagers' secrets, their fears, and their grudges. He saw the accusation of witchcraft as an opportunity, a chance to solidify his power and settle old scores. He had no love for the accused woman. She had dared to challenge his authority. Bernard Gouy arrived in Cordes with a small retinue of guards and scribes. The villagers watched in silence as the Inquisitor dismounted his horse, his presence casting a long shadow over the square. Pierre Clergue greeted him with a respectful bow, eager to assist in the investigation. The interrogation began swiftly. The accused, a woman named Alay, was brought before Gouy. He questioned her relentlessly about her knowledge of herbs, her solitary walks in the woods, and her supposed dealings with the devil. Alay vehemently denied the charges, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. When words failed to elicit a confession, Gouy resorted to more persuasive methods. Alay was subjected to torture. The rack stretched her limbs, The Strapado hoisted her into the air, and the water cure filled her lungs. Each scream was met with Gooey's impassive gaze and the relentless questioning of the scribes. Sister Agnes, who had accompanied Gooey to Cords, could no longer bear to witness the proceedings. She stood outside the village hall, the screams of the tortured woman echoing in her ears. The cries were a dagger to her soul, a stark reminder of the cruelty that was being carried out in the name of God. Pierre Clergue watched the interrogation with a chilling detachment. He reveled in Alea's suffering, seeing it as a victory over those who dared to defy him. He offered veiled suggestions to Gooey, guiding the Inquisitor towards the answers he desired. Under torture, Alea eventually confessed to everything. She admitted to witchcraft, to consorting with demons, and to casting spells on her neighbors. Gooey read her confession aloud in the village square, the words painting a lurid picture of depravity and evil. That night Sister Agnes sought out Gooey. She challenged him, questioning the validity of a confession obtained through torture. She argued that fear and pain could drive anyone to say anything. Gooey listened patiently, but his conviction remained unshaken. He believed that any means were justified in the fight against heresy. Far from Cords, in the remote village of Montelou, Guillaume Belibest heard whispers of the events unfolding. The accusation of witchcraft, the torture, and the confession, these were all signs of the Church's growing paranoia and its relentless pursuit of dissent. He knew that his own time was growing short, that the net was closing in around him. Gooey left Cords, satisfied that he had purged another pocket of heresy, but he knew that the fight was far from over. The whispers of witchcraft were just the beginning. The shadows of faith were deepening, and the Inquisition would continue its relentless march, seeking out every flicker of dissent in the darkness. The web of heresy began to reveal itself, thread by thread. Gooey meticulously pieced together the testimonies, names whispered in fear and resentment, linking individuals across villages and social strata. He saw a network not just of Cathars, but of those who aided them, sheltered them, or simply sympathized with their plight. The challenge now was to unravel the entire tapestry, exposing its hidden connections. A desperate plea reached Agnes through a trusted contact. A man, accused of sheltering a Cathar sympathizer, was injured and on the run. Torn between her duty to the Church and her compassion, Agnes made a decision that could cost her everything. She resolved to help him secretly, offering him sanctuary within the convent walls, a sanctuary she knew was not absolute. Pierre Clergue saw the Inquisition not just as a tool of religious purification, but as a weapon to consolidate his own power. He carefully steered accusations towards his enemies, using whispers of heresy to undermine their standing in the village and seize their lands. His sermons, ostensibly about faith and repentance, were laced with veiled threats and pointed insinuations, ensuring his dominance over the community. Gooey recognized the patterns. The movement of individuals, the clandestine meetings, the shared symbols. The map became a living entity, revealing the arteries and veins of heresy that pulsed beneath the surface of seemingly devout communities. He would cut off those arteries, cauterize the wounds, and cleanse the land of its infection. Agnes knew she was risking everything. Discovery would mean excommunication, imprisonment, or worse. But the man's suffering was a constant reminder of the human cost of the Inquisition's zeal. She tended to his wounds, both physical and spiritual, offering him comfort and a moment of respite from the relentless persecution. Clergue cultivated a network of informants, individuals driven by fear, greed, or resentment. He used their information to manipulate events, reinforcing his authority and eliminating his rivals. He pretended to be a shepherd of his flock, but in reality, he was a wolf in disguise, preying on the vulnerabilities of his people. Deep in the mountains, Bilibest continued to minister to his dwindling flock, preserving the Cathar faith against all odds. He knew his days were numbered, but he remained steadfast, offering his followers hope and guidance in the face of relentless persecution. His words were like a balm to their wounded spirits, reminding them of the enduring power of their beliefs. Gui's interrogation techniques were honed over years of experience. He knew how to exploit weaknesses, to instill fear, to break even the most resolute spirits. He sought not just confessions, but the names of others, the connections that would lead him to the heart of the heresy. He was a hunter, and his prey was the souls of the damned. Agnes's conscience wrestled with her faith. The suffering she witnessed, the injustice she perceived, challenged the very foundations of her beliefs. She prayed for guidance, for strength, for a way to reconcile her duty to the church with her compassion for the persecuted. But the answers remained elusive, shrouded in darkness. With his rivals eliminated, Clerg seized their lands and consolidated his power. He became the de facto ruler of the village, his authority unchallenged, his wealth growing. He justified his actions with pious pronouncements, but his true motives were clear: greed and ambition, cloaked in the guise of religious zeal. Despite the ever-present danger, Bilibest refused to surrender hope. He played his flute, sharing with his followers the last vestiges of Cathar joy, finding solace in community and nature. Even facing death, he held onto the simple truths of his faith. The Inquisition's net tightened. Accusations multiplied, fear spread, and the innocent and the guilty alike were swept up in the relentless pursuit of heresy. The social fabric of the region began to unravel as neighbor turned against neighbor, and families were torn apart by suspicion and betrayal. Gui stood as the embodiment of this fear, the unwavering hand of God bringing justice to a land consumed by darkness. Agnes found herself increasingly unable to reconcile the teachings of love and compassion with the brutal realities unfolding within the Inquisition's chambers. The faces of the accused, etched with fear and pain, haunted her waking hours. The weight of her doubts grew heavier with each passing day. Was it truly God's will that these people should suffer so terribly? Was the Church truly infallible, or could it be led astray by zealous men? Unbeknownst to Agnes, Bernard Gui remained steadfast in his conviction. He saw himself as an instrument of divine justice, purging the land of heresy. Doubt was a weakness he could not afford. Agnes confided in another nun, her voice barely above a whisper, expressing her growing unease. The other sister, fearful of the Inquisition's reach, offered only cautious words of comfort. Driven by her conscience, Agnes sought guidance from a priest known for his wisdom and compassion. She hoped he could shed light on the moral complexities she faced. Pierre Clerg listened to Agnes's troubled confessions, carefully weighing his words. He understood the dangers of openly criticizing the Inquisition, even within the sanctity of the confessional. "Sister," Clerg said, his voice low, "faith and reason are not always in harmony. It is a difficult path you tread. Pray for guidance, but remember your vows to the Church." Agnes emerged from the church, Clerg's words echoing in her mind. His advice offered little solace, leaving her more conflicted than before. Meanwhile, in the inquisitorial chamber, Bernard Gui relentlessly pursued his investigations, convinced of the righteousness of his cause. He saw only heretics, enemies of God, deserving of punishment. His relentless pursuit of Guillaume Bilibest consumed him. He pored over maps and testimonies, piecing together the fragments of information that might lead him to the last Cathar perfect. Agnes, compelled by a sense of duty and a growing unease, found herself observing an interrogation. The sight of the accused, broken and defeated, further solidified her doubts about the methods of the Inquisition. Torn between her faith and her conscience, Agnes knelt in prayer, her heart heavy with the weight of her doubts. She knew that a choice was looming, a choice that could change the course of her life and challenge the very foundations of her beliefs. Bernard Guy's obsession with eradicating heresy intensified. Every whisper, every rumor was a thread he pulled, hoping it would unravel the tapestry of Catharism. Bilibest, the elusive perfect, was his primary target, a symbol of resistance that had to be crushed. Informants were paid handsomely, spies planted in villages, all feeding Guy's insatiable hunger for information. Guillaume Bilibest knew the net was tightening. The Inquisition's reach extended further each day, fueled by fear and greed. He moved his small band of followers constantly, seeking refuge in remote farms and hidden caves, always wary of betrayal. The dangers were manifold: starvation, exposure, and the ever-present threat of capture. Pierre Clergue, ever the opportunist, saw the intensified hunt for heretics as a chance to consolidate his power. He subtly guided the Inquisitor's attention, dropping hints and exaggerating suspicions against those who challenged his authority or held lands he coveted. His words, carefully chosen, were poison cloaked in piety. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Bilibest. He was the shepherd of a flock scattered and hunted, the last beacon of a dying faith. The music from his flute was a prayer, a lament, a desperate plea for guidance in the face of unrelenting persecution. Guy employed every tool at his disposal, from subtle persuasion to brutal torture. He broke wills, extracted confessions, and turned families against each other. Fear was his most potent weapon, and he wielded it with ruthless efficiency. Each confession brought him closer to his ultimate prize, Guillaume Bilibest. Agnes witnessed the suffering firsthand. The cries of the tortured, the despair in their eyes, chipped away at her faith in the righteousness of the Inquisition. She offered what comfort she could, a silent act of defiance against the cruelty she saw around her. Her conscience became a battleground between obedience and compassion. Bilibest and his followers were almost caught. A sudden raid on a farmhouse where they had sought shelter forced them to flee in the dead of night. It was a close call, a stark reminder of the ever-present danger. He knew he had to change his plans, find a safer haven, before it was too late. Clergue, driven by his own ambition, secretly met with one of Bilibest's trusted followers. He offered promises of safety and reward in exchange for information, preying on their fears and vulnerabilities. He sought not just to eliminate heresy, but to solidify his own dominance over the village. The news struck Bilibest like a physical blow. One of his most trusted companions, a man who had shared his hardships and his faith for years, had betrayed him. The informant had revealed their hiding place to the Inquisition. The web of trust, already frayed by persecution, had finally broken. Guy felt the thrill of the hunt nearing its end. The information provided by the informant was precise, detailed. He knew where Bilibest was hiding, and he prepared to move swiftly and decisively. The final act was about to begin. Agnes wrestled with her conscience. She knew Guy was closing in on Bilibest, and she suspected the methods he would employ. The thought of another innocent soul suffering under the Inquisition's brutal hand filled her with dread. She prayed for guidance, for the strength to do what was right, even if it meant defying her superiors. Bilibest knew his time was near. He could hear the Inquisitor's men approaching, their voices echoing through the mountains. He accepted his fate with a quiet dignity, his faith unshaken despite the betrayal and the suffering he had endured. He was ready to face whatever awaited him. The shadow of the Inquisition stretched far, even into the smallest villages. Pierre Clergue, ever the opportunist, recognized the power fear held over his flock. He began to subtly sow seeds of suspicion, pointing fingers and twisting words to solidify his own position. He started with small accusations, carefully planted during confession. A word here, a doubt there, about a neighbor's strange habits or unusual beliefs. He masterfully manipulated the fear of eternal damnation to gain leverage. Letters began to make their way to Toulouse, anonymous accusations carefully crafted to implicate those who dared to question his authority or challenged his influence. Each word was a calculated strike. In Toulouse, Bernard Gouy received the letters. He saw them as further proof of the heresy festering in the region. While he appreciated the zeal of the informants, his focus remained on bigger fish, the organized Cathar networks and rumored witchcraft covens. One such farmer, Jean-Luc, refused to sell Clergue his prime land. The priest's veiled threats soon escalated. Whispers of Jean-Luc's unorthodox farming practices and late-night gatherings started circulating. Sister Agnes, tending to the sick in the village, noticed the growing fear and resentment. She heard the hushed whispers, saw the fearful glances. Something felt deeply wrong. With Jean-Luc implicated in heresy, his land conveniently fell into Clergue's hands. The priest's influence grew, unchallenged and unchecked. The fear was palpable. Anyone who questioned Clergue, anyone who seemed to possess something he desired, became a target. The Inquisition, though distant, was his weapon of choice. He blackmailed those who knew his secrets, silencing them with bribes and threats. His power was absolute, built on fear and deceit. Agnes prayed for guidance, for the strength to understand what was happening. She felt a growing unease, a sense that the Church's authority was being twisted for personal gain. Bernard Gouy, consumed by his grand pursuit of heresy, remained unaware of the insidious game being played in the small village. The priest's actions were merely a footnote in his larger crusade. In the village, Pierre Clergue reigned supreme. His sermons were now pronouncements, his word law. The Inquisition's shadow had become his shield and the people his prisoners. Betrayal often wears the mask of friendship. A trusted shepherd, seduced by the promise of gold and absolution from Pierre Clergue, had led Gouis's men to Bilibest's hidden sanctuary. Bernard Gouy, ever vigilant, orchestrated the capture with meticulous precision. He knew Bilibest was the last pillar of Catharism, and his capture would deliver a fatal blow to the heresy. The attack was swift and brutal. Bilibest, though old and weary, fought with the courage of a man defending his faith, but he was outnumbered and soon overpowered. Agnes, summoned to witness the arrival of the captured heretic, felt a pang of guilt and compassion. She saw not a dangerous heretic, but a broken man. The dungeon was cold and unforgiving, a place designed to break the spirit. Bilibest, however, found solace in prayer and the unwavering belief in his faith. The interrogation began with calm reasoning, a facade of understanding. Gouy sought not just a confession, but a renunciation of Bilibest's beliefs. Bilibest, despite his weakened state, remained resolute. He answered Gouis's questions with silence, his faith his only defense. Patience had its limits. Gouy, faced with Bilibest's stubborn silence, signaled for the interrogation to take a darker turn. The rack stretched his limbs, the water bloated his body, the flames seared his skin. But Bilibast's spirit remained unbroken. He would not betray his faith, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. Agnes, unable to bear the injustice any longer, secretly observed the torture. The sight of Bilibast's suffering shattered her remaining faith in the Inquisition's methods. Pierre Clergue, satisfied with the outcome, relished his role in Bilibast's capture. His influence in the village had grown, his rivals silenced. The Inquisition had served his purposes well. Though his body was broken, Bilibast's spirit remained unbroken. He had faced the Inquisition's wrath and emerged victorious in his own way, a testament to the enduring power of faith. The trial of Guillaume Bilibast began under the stern gaze of Bernard Gouy. The air in the Toulouse courthouse was thick with anticipation and dread. It was a theater of power, where the fate of a man, and perhaps a faith, would be decided. Guillaume, despite his age and captivity, held himself with a quiet dignity. He was the last beacon of a dying faith, and his spirit remained unbroken. The weight of his followers, both living and dead, was heavy on his shoulders. Gouy began to read the charges against Bilibast: heresy, blasphemy, and leading others astray from the Holy Church. Each accusation was delivered with the weight of papal authority behind it, amplified by the somber acoustics of the court. Pierre Clergue watched from the sidelines, a silent observer with a vested interest. He reveled in the power he wielded, the fear he inspired. Bilibast's downfall was another step in consolidating his own influence. Agnes stood apart, her heart heavy with doubt. She witnessed the proceedings with growing unease, the rigid formality and the unwavering conviction of the inquisitors contrasting sharply with the evident suffering of the accused. Gouy presented his evidence, testimonies extracted through torture and fear. Each confession, though obtained under duress, was presented as undeniable proof of Bilibast's heresy and the corruption of his followers. Bilibast listened, his face etched with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. He knew the confessions were lies, extracted through unimaginable cruelty, but he also knew the power of the Inquisition and the futility of arguing against its predetermined verdict. Gouy began his interrogation, his questions sharp and probing, designed to trap Bilibast in contradictions and force him to renounce his beliefs. He sought not truth, but confirmation of his own righteous judgment. Bilibast responded with a quiet dignity, refusing to be baited or intimidated. He spoke of his faith, of the love and compassion that guided his actions, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Agnes watched, her conscience warring with her loyalty to the Church. The disparity between the compassion she preached and the cruelty she witnessed became unbearable. She knew she could no longer remain silent. Gouy, sensing he had enough to secure a conviction, adjourned the trial. He had little doubt about the outcome. Bilibast's fate was sealed, his death another victory for the Holy Inquisition. Agnes, steeling her resolve, approached Gouy. She had made her decision. She would speak her truth, no matter the cost. The power dynamics of the inquisitorial court were about to be challenged, not from the accused, but from within the Church itself. A gasp rippled through the courtroom as Sister Agnes rose. Her voice, though trembling slightly, cut through the oppressive silence. "I can no longer be silent. This trial is a mockery of justice, a perversion of faith." Bernard Gouil's eyes narrowed, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Silence this heretic sympathizer. She is deluded, blinded by false compassion." Bilibast met Agnes's gaze, a flicker of hope in his weary eyes. He knew her act of defiance would come at a great cost to her. Agnes was immediately arrested and imprisoned. Her bold act had shattered the facade of unwavering righteousness the Inquisition presented. Bilibast was condemned as a heretic and burned at the stake. His death marked the end of an era for the Cathars, but his memory lived on in the hearts of those who had known him. Agnes faced her own trial, accused of heresy and obstruction of the Inquisition. She defended her actions, arguing that compassion and justice were paramount to blind obedience. Gui, despite his respect for Agnes's piety, found her guilty. She was sentenced to confinement within the monastery, a punishment meant to silence her dissent. Pierre Clergue's manipulations were eventually exposed. He was defrocked and punished for his abuses of power, his reputation forever tarnished. Agnes spent her remaining years in quiet contemplation, her act of defiance a seed of doubt planted in the hearts of some within the Church. The Inquisition left an indelible scar on the Languedoc, its once thriving communities decimated, its culture suppressed. The memory of the Cathars lingered, a symbol of resistance against religious tyranny. Though the Cathar faith was driven underground, its teachings of peace, simplicity, and individual conscience continued to be passed down in secret, a testament to the enduring power of belief. Bernard Gui continued his work, convinced of his righteousness, yet haunted by the faces of those he condemned. He had waged a war against heresy, but at what cost to his own soul?